Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are thrilled you are joining us for today's webinar. My name is Maria Vargas of the Department of Energy, and I'm just going to beg your indulgence 1 minute. We're just going to wait one more minute for folks dialing in. We will get started, but I wanted to say thank you to everyone who's joined so far. We will start in just 1 minute. Okay, well, it's 1:01, so I think we'll go ahead and get started because we want to answer as many questions and talk to as many people as we can today. So we're going to start right on time. So welcome, everyone. My name is Maria Vargas. I'm the Director of the Better Buildings Initiative at the U.S. Department of Energy, and we are thrilled that so many people are joining us today for something that we are piloting within the Better Buildings family, and that is a pilot dedicated to understanding the pathways to low and no carbon in buildings, multifamily housing, and manufacturing facilities. So if we can go to the next slide. Great. We are on a webinar, and unfortunately, we're limited in how interactive we can be on camera and in the chat function, but we're going to try and make this as interactive and answer as many questions from you as we can. So the way we're going to do that today is by using slido.com. So if everyone can just take a minute to either open a new window or use your mobile device to go to slido.com, and the event code is DOE. And if you'll just have that open, and you can start typing questions whenever you want, but that's what we will use to do Q&A. You will, as an audience and as webinar attendees, see the questions that come up, and you can upvote questions that someone else might have typed in that you can, if you're interested in that question, you can let us know by upvoting. It's very straightforward. I'm sure it'll be obvious to you as you open Slido. So that's how we're going to do Q&A, and I've just been talking a little bit to give everybody time to do that. So if you haven't gone to slido.com, please do that, and we'll take questions at the end. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we, again, are thrilled that you are joining us today. You see my picture on the screen, but I am joined by a number of colleagues who are going to be part of the Q&A part. Nate Allen, Paul Torsolini, and Joe Invick are going to join. They are already here, but they're going to join me on screen for the Q&A part. And the goal for us today as a group is to really share with you why through Better Buildings we're looking at a low carbon pilot, what it is we're hoping to do, a quick overview of the pilot, why we think what we're trying to accomplish is so important, and then talk about next steps, and then answer any questions that you have. So next slide. As a reminder for everybody, we think Better Buildings and the Better Buildings Initiative is a really great way and a great platform to use to pilot efforts working with partners on low and no carbon pathways. As everybody knows, really the work that we do, Better Buildings, is a voluntary leadership initiative where we work with partners, again, in multifamily housing, commercial buildings, and manufacturing facilities to really understand the opportunities to advance greater energy efficiency and drive great energy savings, and doing it in a way that's transparent, working with market leaders to understand how it is that they've been able to move ahead, and we're working particularly with those that are willing to share what it is they've done, so as a country we can move forward faster. So it's been just wonderful to work with many of you on the phone today to define what leadership looks like, and work with you as you share what it is you've done and what you've been able to accomplish within your organization to drive energy efficiency and to accelerate the adoption of not only more energy efficient technologies, but other solutions across your workplace to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, create jobs, and save money. As you know, we're partnering with about 1,000 partners over the initiative, and to date the program saved over $11 billion in energy costs. And in recent years, we've continued to expand and grow how it is DOE is able to work with the market by including things like water and waste and supply chain initiatives to further define leadership and really drive savings. And so working with, as a partnership program, we work very closely with our partners to understand what's next and what's important to our partners. Next, please. And what we do know, both because we are at the Department of Energy and we work with you, as the Department of Energy, we know that buildings and manufacturing facilities are really critical to a low carbon future for our country. Buildings and plants represent about 2/3 of total US CO2 emissions, and there's tremendous opportunity to reduce these emissions and our energy use. So next slide, please. And what we know is that many of you are already working on reducing your energy use, but really your carbon emissions that are associated with your buildings and plants. Many of you, about 70% of the organizations working with us in Better Buildings and Better Plants, have enterprise-wide goals for your organization, whether they are carbon goals, greenhouse gas reduction goals, or renewable energy goals. And that there is a desire, a hunger to sort of address what it is your organization's doing in its facilities, and that's across the public and private sectors. And I think, though, as we talk to partners and work with all of you, that there are broad and ambitious goals, but when we talk about what that means in terms of work being done at particular buildings or plants, a lot of times, a lot of our partners aren't sure what the pathway is. When we ask partners, frankly, you have this amazing goal, how are you going to get there? Many of our partners sort of say, we don't know. We're trying to figure that out. And that's really the context and catalyst for this pilot program, to really work with our partners to understand the pathways that are available and that would be chosen by partners looking to achieve carbon reduction targets. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So what we really want to do as part of this low carbon pilot, and it's really a pilot effort in the true sense of the word, we want to work with you. This is how a lot of the voluntary programs that I've been part of, Energy Star and Better Buildings, really do start and work well. And because they're voluntary programs, the opportunity to pilot and try new things is very exciting, and we can move on it very quickly. And so through this pilot, we are really anxious to work with those of you who want to work with us to showcase real world pathways that represent how different organizations can achieve either low or no carbon in their buildings or plants. And you know, we want to demonstrate what's possible, but we want to know where you're being successful. We also, though, are very anxious in learning from partners where you're getting stuck, where the barriers still exist, the opportunities to overcome those. There may be opportunities to overcome those, and sometimes there may not be, and that's really what we want to understand. That will help us more broadly at DOE understand the opportunities we have for how to invest the money that we spend on, for example, R&D efforts and things. I think we are anxious to work with you on convening partners to share best practices and to really understand what's possible. And the way to really think about what we're trying to accomplish in this pilot is to understand where aspiration and these large enterprise-wide goals really meet the real world. We're very interested in working with you on all of that. And I'm going to pause and say this is a little bit of a departure from what we've found in Better Buildings so far. And what I mean by that is, as we've worked with hundreds of organizations who are pursuing energy efficiency and energy efficiency solutions, what we came to realize was that there's a lot of similarities between the efforts of different parts of the economy, whether you're an industrial facility, a school district, or a hotel, when it came to driving energy efficiency. And that's why we did things like the Better Buildings Challenge Swap, was to really highlight the similarities. I think when we're talking about low carbon pathways, we are very aware that there are going to be lots of different pathways, lots of different ways to get to low and no carbon. It's going to depend on where your buildings are. It's going to depend on the kind of organization that you are, and there will be as a result, I think lots of learning and lots of different pathways forward. And so we're excited to learn about those and work with partners who are going to do this pilot with us. If we can go to the next slide. I think what's really important, and where we've been talking to many of you about low and no carbon, is being clear that we are not going to be prescriptive in telling partners, you as our partners in the pilot, how to get there, because again, that's really going to depend on the kind of building you have, the opportunities you have, where you're located, etc. But as the Department of Energy, we do have a framework of how it is we are thinking and working with lots of stakeholders in the market. The pathway to low carbon can really be represented by this waterfall. So if you are asking, what do you mean by low or no carbon? How is the Department of Energy suggesting we get there? It's really, we've tried to highlight it in this picture here. This chart really shows the importance of energy efficiency, right? So it's really going through these steps more or less in this order to try and move towards a low or no carbon facility. So starting with energy efficiency, making sure that you've really eliminated all the waste in your facilities. So by the time you get to the energy needed, you can not only have an accurate sense of what you need, but be confident that you've eliminated the waste. So that your choice of on-site renewables, and you can see those listed here, are just opportunities that you may have available to you. We want people to think about grid interactivity. And then the choice would be, once you've taken those opportunities, to figure out if off-site renewables are something that would be available. And then at the very end, looking at purchasing RECs or offsets to get to a low carbon facility. So let me be a little bit more clear, if I can, on the next slide, of what it is we're going to try and work with partners on. Go ahead, next slide. So what it is we're asking, I'm jumping ahead a couple of slides, but what it is we're asking for pilot partners to do is to pick 1 or 2 buildings. So this isn't an enterprise-wide commitment as part of the pilot. What we're really hoping that and asking partners to do as part of this pilot is pick 1 or 2 buildings within your portfolio, and let's use those buildings as opportunities to understand real world success in moving those buildings towards this low carbon future. And so the kinds of things that we're hoping to get out of the pilot are the ability for you to share, and then us as the Department of Energy to share what leaders are doing to drive success. Again, we're guessing we're going to have lots of very different pathways, but we'll want to know the kinds of buildings, the details of sort of what you did as you think back on the waterfall chart, how you were able to drive lower and lower carbon emissions in your building, and understand the opportunities that each of the key elements of your energy use played as part of that, and then your energy supply. So this is just very philosophically and notionally what it is we're hoping to show and share, and we'll be asking you to share as part of your participation in the pilot. So if you can go to the next slide, I want to just blow out the projected pathway to carbon neutrality. So if we can, I think a really key part of what we'll be working with partners through this pilot on is the different pathways that each organization or each building or plant or multifamily housing facility go through to get to it. So on the left side, you really see some examples of where your organization could be now. So on the bottom, it's really just showing if the goal is to get to 100% low or no carbon. There may be organizations that are just starting out, have done a fair amount of work in the efficiency space and some work in the renewable energy space. There are others. The chart on top shows you a little bit more of an organization that's thought through and has done a little bit more work, relying on energy efficiency, some electrification, some on-site renewables. And the goal is really to try, but as you can see in the top chart, roughly a little less than 2/3 of the low carbon success of that building is in purchasing offsets. And I think where we're really hoping to go is to a waterfall that looks similar, and helping pilot participants and working with you to understand the real world opportunities, but again, the barriers to get to a pathway that looks closer to the chart that you see on your right. So if we can go through, next slide. So the pilot is really about asking those of you who want to work with DOE to demonstrate and share the pathways that you are pursuing with your organization to meet these goals. And we are excited and hoping to work with many of you to do just that. Let me just be a little bit more specific in the next slide about what it is we're asking for participants to do and how DOE will work with you to do that. So we are asking that partners, those of you who've worked with us in Better Buildings, none of this should seem unfamiliar. We're asking partners to share their experiences, their successes, and their challenges. Again, it's not, we really want to know where people are getting stuck and trying to understand the stuckiness of the barriers that partners are facing as they look to pursue low carbon strategies at roughly 2 buildings or plants in the years. We're interested in working with partners to develop an inventory, really to understand sort of how they're using energy now, the strategies that they've embarked on, other strategies that may work for them, and then really work with us to help identify and share what it is that you've done so that we can share those successful strategies and pathways with others. And our hope and plan as the Department of Energy is to provide technical guidance, but also what we've found so powerful in Better Buildings is to connect peer-to-peer learning and to connect organizations who are working and are facing sort of similar issues to work with each other and learn from each other. And our goal is to facilitate that in a way to really affect change. And then to help you establish baselines and set goals and to collect and share and highlight and brainstorm some options that may be things you've thought about, they may be things you haven't thought about. It's really to go through and think about and bring to bear a lot of the expertise, both at DOE and some of the national labs, to help you think through this. And then, of course, we want to recognize what you've done by not only sharing your story, but sharing the fact that you're really helping lead the way in this really important effort for us as a country. Next slide. So I think we talked a lot about this. We're really hoping to work closely with you as to the extent that you want us to work with you on these, but it's really to try and understand really the real world opportunities and challenges that you are facing and that you're finding through these pathways. And you know, the bottom line, I mean, we are looking forward to highlighting what you're doing and making sure that you're being recognized for the work and the information that you're helping others in the market. But it's also, we're very mindful that this is very specific to your organization too, in terms of working with you to make sure that we're improving the resilience, reducing your energy costs, and having you make progress toward your organization-wide sustainability goals. A number of partners who are already working with us and have sort of stepped up to the pilot have told us that they're looking forward to having 1 or 2 buildings in their portfolio in which they're able to very clearly not only go down and document this pathway, but use it as a very nice showcase for what it is they're able to do across their portfolio, and that is useful as they move up the chain into the C-suite to talk about the kinds of opportunities that exist for them as an organization. So I think we're almost done with the slides and getting to Q&A. So if we can, next slide, please. Yeah, so what are the next steps? So we are, again, anxious to hear questions from you. If there are questions that you forget to ask or think about afterwards, you can always reach out to us afterwards, either to the Department of Energy, anybody on this call, or to your account managers. If you know already you want to join the pilot, just email me. My email is on the last slide we'll show in a minute. That's as simple as it is. We're not asking for a partnership agreement or anything. It's really, at this point, a pilot effort, and we just want to know which partners are interested in working with us. Once we know that you're interested in working with us, we'll move fairly quickly to set up an introductory call with you. That'll be a call with the DOE team and someone from one of the national labs to really understand sort of the buildings that you're thinking about, what your plans forward are, and get a better handle on sort of the kinds of places that you've had success or are struggling or are thinking about. It's really a call to dig a little bit deeper into the particular buildings, plants, housing facilities that you are interested in working with us on. And we're really hoping to, and I think we have already, we're on the path to having a really good set of initial partners to help continue to help us as the Department of Energy inform our strategy moving forward, with the hope that we can convene those partners probably virtually at the upcoming Better Buildings Summit in May. So I believe the next slide is a plug for that summit. This is our second year. We'll be doing a virtual summit, but it is May 17th to the 20th. And we are looking forward to a lot of great sessions this year, including sessions that would be useful, I think, for organizations that are working on low carbon strategies, including those who are working with us as part of this pilot. Registration for the summit will open in less than a week. It opens on February 16th, so please be looking in your email inbox for that. As a virtual event, it's free to attend, and you can pick the sessions that are interesting for you. And I think it's a really nice opportunity to continue engaging with us as part of the Better Buildings family on all sorts of different topics that are hopefully useful, but certainly relevant to you and the organization and the challenges you're facing. So now I think we're going to pivot to Q&A. So let me invite now Paul Torsolini and Nate Allen and Joe Invick to come on screen with me. And while you are typing in your questions, any questions you might have, let me ask Paul and Nate and Joe if there's anything that they would like to add that I didn't cover or may not have been as articulate about as I should have been in the slides that we went through. Paul, for many of you for those of you who don't know Paul works at the National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL. Nate Allen works with me at the Department of Energy, and Joe Invick works very closely with us as part of a firm that we work with called Retech Advisors, and they've all been instrumental in thinking through this pilot and really establishing and creating it. And we're the team that is here to help you and help pilot partners. And so with that, let me ask Paul, Nate, or Joe if there's anything else that we should talk about or mention before we jump into Q&A.
So I guess I would just add that I think there's a lot of discussion about the kind of what we're doing in terms of trying to drive carbon down. And really the focus of this pilot is to help with the how and really show that it's happening and that we can measure it. And to hear what some of your challenges are in getting there. With my national lab hat on, I would say something like, well, we should just do all buildings to be low carbon, zero carbon, and what's stopping you, right? So, having a discussion around what is stopping us from moving in that direction is really important to help inform what DOE is doing around research, as well as program planning. And so that's something we certainly want to hear from everybody.
And Paul, thank you for that reminder. I meant to mention to folks, this pilot, we're not including embodied carbon. I meant to add that earlier. This is really scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. This pilot is not going to try and tackle everything all at once. So to be very clear, this is really focused on scope 1, scope 2, but not embodied carbon. And I meant to mention that and I didn't. So thank you, Paul. Something you said reminded me of that.
And if you're doing embodied carbon, great.
Right.
That's not, we're really looking at that operational piece with this effort.
Great. Nate and Joe, anything else that you'd want to add?
I think that was a key point there. I'm glad we covered it. There are two big themes that I think about in the context of this pilot that I think you covered well, Maria. One is that it is a pilot, so we're working with partners to figure out exactly what scenarios make the most sense, and to that end, flexibility. And I think that came through on the waterfall slide that Maria discussed. But we're interested in what approaches are working for you and can be relevant and helpful for others. I'll just say, as I'm talking quickly, I went through the attendee list last night. I think we've got great turnout for this call, and it's nice to see so many familiar names. We've been working at this as a team, Maria, Paul, Joe, and I, and some others for the better part of almost a year now, but we've also had some great input from partners in thinking through how to scope this. So I want to thank all of you for your help getting us to this point. And yeah, I'll turn to Joe and let's get into discussion.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to say before we get to Q&A is, we, as part of this pilot, we want to kind of embrace the diversity of approaches there are, or the different pathways there are in getting to low carbon. We acknowledge that, the market collectively is increasingly interested in setting things like science-based targets or carbon neutrality goals or low carbon goals, but there's often this disconnect between, okay, we've set this lofty goal, but how do we actually operationalize that and get there? And the reality is that the answer to that question looks very different from building to building. If you've got a multi-100,000 square foot warehouse, maybe you can put up solar panels that are going to cover 50% of your consumption. But if you're a high-rise office building, you probably can't. So far from wanting to standardize the approach, we want to kind of highlight the various ways and pathways there are to get to low carbon and show that there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, as it were.
Thank you all. So Marissa, I'm looking on myslido.com and I can see questions. How do we get those on the screen? Can we move to that? There we go. There we go. Okay, so we're just going to try and go through these as a team and see if we can answer your questions. So will slides or recording be available? The answer is yes. We are happy to send out slides to anyone. We can link to a recording on our website. We're happy to do that as well. If you're interested in slides, just let us know, and we'll be happy to send those to you. All right, and then we have a question. I'm just going for. We'll just go for the upvoted questions. So, will some of these DOE's technical assistance be related to financing challenges? Well, I'm glad we have Joe and Vic on the phone. Joe's been really leading a lot of the work. Joe was the brain behind the Better Buildings Challenge Financial Navigator that we now have as part of the Better Buildings Solutions Center. So Joe, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about this if you would, and see if we can take a run at the answer to this question.
Sure. I mean, the short answer is yes. We consider financing, whether it's finding ways to structure internal investment programs like CapEx programs or internal funding opportunities, or even things like green bonds in a way that can support low carbon targets, all the way to looking at third party, full service financing solutions, loans, leases, efficiency as a service, PACE financing. Those are all things that we're interested in. And this isn't purely a technical engineering pilot. We're interested in not only the technical solutions to low carbon, but the strategic solutions, and the financial solutions to making this happen, and kind of organizational design too, right? How do you think about starting an initiative like this within an organization, whose approvals are needed, and how do you kind of build the right sort of buy-in internally? Those are all part of the story that we want to tell. But financing don't have any sort of specific, obviously we'll kind of meet you where you are and work with you on kind of navigating the finance landscape, but definitely a key pillar.
So can I add something to that, Maria, too?
Go ahead, of course.
So I think that there's also a piece of it in how do you engage in larger projects and larger pieces of. So if you're already planning on spending capital to, say, reposition a property, renovate a property, how can we best use those opportunities and some of the money you're already using to maximize the energy efficiency benefit, or to then leverage some of the energy efficiency financing you already have, to kind of, extend what you're doing. Right, so not just isolating these things to an energy project or a carbon project, but actually kind of getting creative and saying, okay, what are you planning on doing? What are your plans for that building for the next several years? And how can we kind of, as you touch that building and spend money on that building as part of the routine, how do you move that building towards a lower carbon state?
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Thanks, Eric, for the question. If we didn't touch on something, ask another question and it'll pop up. But I think hopefully that gave you a feel for how it is we'll be working with partners. So, and Ruchi, let's see. Now the only problem is these questions, they shift order. Okay, hoping as a collective we can influence utilities. Yeah, so I agree. Is there anything that I think, uh-oh, now the comment disappeared. There it is. Okay. I'm really hoping as a collective we can influence utilities to come up with a little more procurement opportunities, as that's a big barrier. Yes, we're happy. Richie, if you've got ideas on that, we'd love to hear from you and think about it. And that certainly would be part of, as we've all sort of said, it's really trying to understand where ambition meets the real world and what the real world opportunities are, but also what the real world challenges are. So let's pivot to the next question. Is there a particular year you've selected as a baseline? The short answer is no. We're going to work with you on that. I think, you saw the charts and the information that we're looking to get from each of the partners, and we're going to work with you. It's really a baseline that makes sense for your organization, depending on where you are and how far you want to go back to be able to construct the waterfall in terms of the investments you've made and the savings you've got. The goal is to be able to paint that picture through all the steps, and so we're going to work with you on whatever baseline makes sense for the building that you have. The hope is to not go back too far, right? Because we want to make this a pathway that's doable and understandable within the past couple of years. But certainly our guess is that many of the partners we're working with will have already made investments, and we want to capture those as part of this pilot. You don't have to start from square one. I should have made that very clear too. As Better Buildings Challenge partners, almost all of our partners have made significant inroads when it comes to energy efficiency, and so having that work be already part of your story is really important. Anything else from the team on that one?
Well, and I think one of the things, and Maria, you very nicely articulated it on a slide that showed an organization that maybe already had a building that is at zero carbon because they were buying offsets. And then there was this desire of saying, well, maybe I could get more energy efficiency or more renewables on board and take kind of more my own responsibility for what those carbon emissions are, and then buy less offsets at the end of the day. So even though, from a kind of reporting point of view, both buildings may be zero carbon, having it be more of your own asset and using your own resources, may have a higher value to your organization. So we're very interested in those pathways also.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, next one. How much will this pilot adhere to commonly accepted international accepted greenhouse gas practices used by organizations? I think our goal is to not reinvent the wheel, right? Our goal is to really work with tracking and measuring this as people are already doing. So I think the goal is to, again, not take that on as part of this pilot and not come up with something different. It's really to track and use credible sources to understand energy use and savings within already accepted protocols. Paul, Joe, Nate, anything else you want to add there?
I absolutely agree, but as we learn more and more about this, you can always improve what that real impact is. So one of the things that I've been hearing a lot of interest around is more time of use impact of that carbon as well, and not just kind of taking a utility average and reporting it out, which a lot of the protocols do, but actually looking at how do I better align my renewable resources with my consumption in order to reduce my carbon impact, and how to aggregate that up. So one of the nice things about a pilot is that you can answer, you can ask those questions, and we can all think about how the best way to do that is moving forward.
And it dawns on me that we have developed a fact sheet in which we go into and talk about time of use as part of this pilot, and that is available on the Better Building Solutions Center. And so for those who want paper on this too, as in addition to the slides, that fact sheet is available on the Better Building Solutions Center. If you scroll along the top, I think it's under other initiatives, and it says low carbon pilot, and if you click on that, you'll be able to find the fact sheet that goes into what Paul was describing in just a little bit more depth. So I failed to mention that before, and I should have. Lots of things to cover, and we're excited, and I apologize for not mentioning that sooner.
And I would just add quickly on the greenhouse gas protocol question in particular, as somebody who's spent a good chunk of my career making greenhouse gas protocol compliant inventories, we have no intention of this pilot having that level of reporting burden. The idea is that you likely have already done emissions calculations for these properties. So if those were done in a way that sort of adheres to the protocol or reasonably accepted standards, you're a lot of the way to having the data that we would ask for to kind of highlight your success here. So yeah, our intention is to kind of define scope 1 and 2 emissions, and in a few rare cases, scope 3 emissions that you want to include as sort of subject to the pilot, and then kind of work with the data that you have on those properties.
Perfect. Thanks, Joe. I think it's a good pivot to just remind and maybe said another way. I mean, really what we're trying to use this pilot for is to understand those very real world pathways to achieving low or no carbon in these buildings. And so, you know, our partners' willingness to share and participate and really drive that very building specific organizational, what we can really do at these buildings and what's being accomplished and how we're able to do it is just what we're excited about. I think it's what's missing now, and it's just a tremendous opportunity to work with you to do that. And that's why we're so excited about this. So, okay, Kevin, if we have improved efficiency, on-site and off-site renewables, RECs and offsets for the balance, would the pilot conclude building energy is zero carbon? Okay, I guess I'm trying to, I can turn this over to Paul or Joe. I could take a run at it, but Paul or Joe, you want to take a run at this one? Go ahead, Joe.
Sure. So I think and it kind of goes back to the slide that Maria had with the different strategies, right? You're at a place today with the building, and the question is what would you like to do with that building? You know, are you being challenged, you know, to further reduce, you know, or increase the efficiency, increase renewables? If the objective is just to check a box and say that it's zero carbon, we're really interested in the pathways that it took to get there. And like I said before, those pathways may shift. You know, you may decide that as time goes on, you want to have more efficiency and less offsets and less RECs in order to make this work. I'm not sure, and the reason I was stumbling a little bit on it, maybe Maria, you had the same thing too. I'm not sure the objective is to kind of conclude that it is zero carbon. It's really talking about that pathway and where do you get stuck in trying to make a building better? You know, is it technology? Is it financing? Is it a piece of the two? Is it, you know, how to, you know, communicate and discuss these ideas with others in your organization? You know, where do you really get stuck in making it go forward? You know, is it, you know, I know I've heard a lot about complexities of financing, you know, pieces. Rather than at the end of the day, we're going to check a box and proclaim it. We are not in the certification business in that way. And there are programs out there that would certify, that are kind of market facing to do that, but that's not a DOE role.
Yeah, I completely agree, Paul. I just wanted to highlight that this is a low carbon pilot, part of which is a pathway to zero carbon. So we're by no means saying that by the end of this pilot, you're definitely going to be zero carbon or need to be zero carbon. We want to talk about where are you now, what progress can you make by working with us and yourselves over the course of the next 2 years of this pilot, and then what's your pathway going forward. And we fully acknowledge that for certain buildings, RECs or offsets may or may not be part of that pathway, right? We want to have a conversation about that. How do RECs and offsets fit into an operational emissions reduction strategy? Are there ways to shift emphasis that's being put on RECs and offsets now over to more highly additional things that have greater impact, like green power procurement, efficiency, on-site renewables, investment in local but off-site renewables, right? So there's no sort of hard and fast rule or certification that's going to occur here. We want to work with you to understand what those barriers are and, you know, think about building a program that sort of maximizes impact and operational emissions reduction as a priority.
Yeah, and I want to make one other comment on here as I read this question again. This notion that if a building is zero energy, is it zero carbon? And how do those two things line up? You know, if the building is truly using 100% renewable, so my kind of golden standard on this. If you're using 100% renewables and you can show that you're doing it 100% of the time, it's pretty easy to show that you have, zero or very low carbon associated with the operation of the building. If it is just zero energy, a lot of times, from kind of an average point of view, you can talk about it being zero carbon. But I know that on the technical side, a lot of people will push back on me with that and say, yes, but at 2 o'clock in the morning, I know we've got coal as the baseline and I was buying energy at nighttime and then selling it during the day. And that's where the alignment discussion is just starting to come in. And that's really a kind of a new way of thinking about a lot of these pieces. So that may be another piece of that question that was in there.
Okay, great. And then I agree with Rushi's comment. One good way to track true carbon emissions is to figure out carbon reduction as a result of the work they've already done and that they're already reporting through BBC. So that would certainly be a great and easy first step. And then why isn't electrification on this list? I think it is.
It is. So, yeah,
I was just going back to my slides thinking, oh my God, I thought we had electrification on the list. So sorry, that was.
It may not have been on a slide because of the brevity of some of the slides. I am pretty sure it's on the fact sheet though.
It is.
In so some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so apologies, Barry, for that. It is there. I know it's on the fact sheet. So,
but
yes.
I think one other piece on the electrification is we do want to say strategic electrification in how to do it and also get efficiency at the same time. So I think that's an important part, and not, put too much strain on an electrical grid or force the electrical grid maybe to have to build out, some fossil fuel plants in order to meet load. So there is a strategic part on the electrification that it is important to think about.
And Barry just had a comment. I see it below. It just wasn't part of the waterfall slide. Thank you, Barry. We'll make sure it is from now on. It is on the fact sheet. So apologies. Good catch. Thank you for that. Paul's right. You hate to put so many words on these slides that no one reads them, that it's impossible to read. So apologies for that. What other federal agencies is DOE working with through this pilot? We are, HUD is a very active part of the Better Buildings Challenge. So we've been working very closely, as you can see, because we've had a couple multifamily partners who are part of the challenge that have been asking questions. So HUD is part of this. We have colleagues at EPA. We're working to reach out as this pilot gets underway to sort of work with anyone who's interested in working with us. So HUD has been the closest, and we're working with our colleagues at EPA and hope to do more so in the future. And anybody else that would like to join us, we're anxious to work with them on this.
Well, and we certainly have interest. We certainly have interest from people that are owning and managing our federal building stock too, and looking at some of those for pilots and leadership.
Great. Okay, and then Eric's question, for partners interested in joining, how far along the low carbon pathway do they need to be? There isn't a definite answer. As Joe alluded to, really what we're looking for buildings to do is to demonstrate movement along the pathway within 2 years. So there's no hard and fast rule about how far that's why we showed the 2 before charts on the one slide. The 2 graphs our guess was some folks wouldn't be very far down the pathway when we wanted to show that. People who've done some energy efficiency work, maybe some put their toe in the water on renewables. And we're really, we're happy to work with organizations that have buildings that fit that. We're also happy to work with organizations that are further down the path. It's really sort of the spirit of what we're trying to do in this pilot is really trying to understand the pathways that organizations are taking forward and what they're able to do as you move towards low carbon, and be able to sort of share, as you've heard, not only the organizational and financing and other sort of an organization sort of wide strategies, but also sort of the energy story. So the short answer, I should have just given you the short answer, is there's no one fast answer. It's really what you want to do and how much you think you can do in that building in 2 years, right? Because again, if you go back to what we're trying to do in this pilot is have aspiration meet the real world. We really want buildings that have moved down the carbon pathway and are able to demonstrate what they've been able to do in sort of a before and after, the investments they've made and what it's yielded, and then the results as you go down the steps towards reducing the carbon in your building. Anything else, Joe or Paul or Nate, that you want to add there? Okay, so similar, we got a question about looking for buildings that are owned by the participant. What about landlord-tenant situations? We're open to anything, really. I think the goal is to be able to affect the change building-wide. And if tenants in that space are going to, I mean, it'd be interesting to sort of understand the pathway when you have tenants in the building. So just like we're trying to do different buildings from different sectors and different parts of the geographic US, it might also be interesting to have as part of this pilot different management, organizational, and occupancy structures. Having said that, we do want to make sure that we're thinking about the building energy use overall. And so we would just want to factor that in, and just want you to factor that in into sort of the buildings that you decide to have be part of this pilot. If you think being part of the pilot would really be a great way to get your tenants on board and they'd be interested in being part of this, that's great.
Yeah, I would just add, if you're a landlord and you have tenants, we would like to include the tenants in the pilot. If you really feel like you can't engage your tenants successfully on this and really want to be part of the pilot, we should talk about that and see what that might look like. But the intent is for this to be a whole building effort. Now, if you're a tenant and you're doing this and you're not the building owner, that's also an interesting situation in terms of strategies for working with the landlord and all of that. So in either case, I think we're interested in talking. There's no sort of hard and fast rules, but the intent is for this to be a whole building goal wherever possible.
Well, and I realize that in some places where we're starting to get into disclosure laws, you may be the owner of the building and you actually have to aggregate up as part of your responsibility the tenant, meters with that. And so, and again, that's going to vary a little bit depending on where you are with that. But this whole notion around split incentives, those are big challenges, and we do need to figure that out and figure out, strategies and tools and methodologies to get at that. There's also a part of this discussion that has to do with I just lost my train of thought there. It'll come back to me.
Different ownership tenant models.
Yeah.
That's okay. No problem.
I just lost it.
That's okay. There's a lot going on, but I think.
I know.
Okay.
I was looking at one of the other questions there, and it has to do with the scope piece of it, and that we have gotten some questions around, owners that own a building, and does their scope 1 include the whole building, or does it carve out the tenant piece? And is the tenant responsible for the scope 1 of what they're using, especially if that tenant is being metered for that? And you can very easily see that you may be accounting for scopes multiple times if you're not careful between organizations. And so that question has come up, is like, what is, where are the boundaries, especially around scope 1, related to that? And so that's why I said I was reading this other scope question, which made me think of going back to this. But it's also a challenge here.
Well, and then I thought that was a good pivot to Eric's question about, are we interested in unique buildings, sewage treatment plants, skating rinks? I love I hadn't thought of a skating rink today. So I think we're open to any of those. Look, as a country, we're going to need pathways for all different kinds of buildings. And so, I think, unless, my team tells me different, I think any building makes sense. I think you want to pick something where you've got the opportunity for success, and that this is going to be helpful for you as an organization to figure out the right pathway forward. But I think, any building in your portfolio, if you believe and think that it would be helpful for you to have the pathway forward on zero on this, I think we're open to including that as part of the pilot.
Yeah, I think there's some real interesting pieces when you start getting into the sewage treatment, and how far does that boundary go? I know of at least 2 different projects that are tapping into the heat of the sewage line coming out of the sewage treatment plant before it gets dumped back into the environment, and using a heat pump system to cool it off to make it closer to ambient. And so there's some really interesting models that how do you deal with wastewater in those pieces? And sharing those resources, that gets into a discussion about districts and being able to share some of the resources. And absolutely, all those kinds of things I think are on the table in thinking about, how do we reduce our carbon as a country?
Be interesting. Okay. I think we already talked about slide deck being shared. I see a request to have science-based targets do a goal-setting presentation for this group. We have talked to them. We are very well aware of that. So that's a helpful point that we have absolutely, yep, no problem.
And can I add one
go
thing
ahead.
to that?
Yeah,
speaking
go
on the
ahead,
broader
sure.
topic of greenhouse gas reduction commitments and frameworks like science-based targets, and Ruchi, I know you're doing a lot of good work on this. I know you don't know me personally, but I've heard through the grapevine that you're doing great work. There's all kinds of frameworks that are out there. RE100 for 100% renewables, science-based targets, carbon neutrality certification, CDP reporting. Chances are, if your organization is interested in carbon, you're at least evaluating some of those third-party reporting frameworks. And they all work a little bit differently. Some have commitments, some are just reporting, et cetera. So one of the things, we didn't explicitly mention this, but one of the things we're interested in doing with this pilot is understanding how the work that you're doing at the building level aligns with those frameworks. So when you think about a carbon reduction target at the building level, are you trying to align that with the Paris Agreement, effectively, the science-based targets approach, or like how does that feed up into a broader portfolio-wide emissions reduction target? Those are all interesting kind of questions we want to explore as part of the pilot. So very glad you brought up science-based targets. I think that'll be a key part of the conversation.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. And then we have a question about internal price of carbon to inform economics of carbon options. Will there be TA or guidance for this? I'll turn that to Paul or Joe. I think we haven't talked about doing that. I'll let, we can opine on that, and that's the great thing about a pilot. Some of these questions, this happened for the webinar we did for the manufacturing space too. Sometimes you're asking questions that we either haven't thought about or they're good. They're questions because they make us think too about how to best use this pilot. So this is one I'd ask my team to sort of weigh in on.
Well, there's several questions kind of now related to cost and how to monetize it. And again, some of it is that a lot of the cost savings are based on utility rate structures, and today's rate structures, don't necessarily reflect, some of it is historical just on what we could measure at a utility rate. With the new generation of meters, there's possibilities of getting at levels of data that we've never had before to think about it. A lot of the utilities are buying power off of larger grids based on kind of an instantaneous spot market rate. And yet that doesn't necessarily go back to the customer. And so there's definitely disconnects and lots of opportunities around this whole cost thing and how do we think about costs. I'm particularly interested in the energy storage comment here, and because energy storage will always use more energy, just by its nature in a building. And the question is why does it have value? Because you're shifting costs around, or maybe it's that you're able to reduce demand charges, which in essence talks about the infrastructure size. All of those things somehow get tied back to, carbon basis, but we're still, I think, in the kind of the starting parts of some of those science when we start talking about these time-dependent solutions.
Yeah, and on the question of a carbon tax or price on carbon internally, definitely something that we're interested in talking about. My experience with those types of prices is they're typically set at the organization level, or at least at the business unit level. So for a pilot like this, my guess is it would be more likely to be a factor that you need to consider for that building and how you approach the low carbon plan for that building, as opposed to something new that you would create specifically for a building. But if you're thinking of some creative carbon pricing solutions or want to kind of understand how a low carbon plan at the building level fits into those, we're happy to talk about that and potentially connect you with some resources. But excited to hear more about where that question came from.
Yes, agreed.
All these good questions. Let me see. There's a couple other questions that we can answer, I think, very quickly. One is, what is my email? I like that you're answering that or asking that, because that's one we're going to answer. That's on the last slide we'll show in a minute, but it's also very easy to remember. It's my first name, maria.vargas@ee.doe.gov, and we'll share that in a minute so people can write that down too. But it is maria.vargas@ee.doe.gov. And then the question, we've gotten this before too when we talked to the industrial sector about, is this for buildings in the US only? Yes. I think that's, we have a couple manufacturers that have a facility, for example, maybe in Detroit and then one nearby in Canada. Look, we're open. If that building in Canada is useful to you as an organization and you think would be helpful for you as an organization to have, that can be one of your buildings, but we really are focused for the most part on US buildings. Because remember, really the goal of this pilot is to have those that are part of the partnership and the pilot as leaders really share what it is you've done so that other people can learn from you and frankly want to copy what you've done. And so the more you can, keep that within a national boundary, the better off we are, because for a variety of reasons that everyone can, that we can sort of have replicable solutions, and they become models that are easy for other people in the US to follow. Recognizing that there may be different local, utility rates and all of that stuff that get factored in, but really the bottom line is this is primarily for US buildings. I mean, again, we're happy to work with you if there's a really compelling reason you want to do one otherwise, but it really is primarily for US buildings. So somebody's asking what's the pilot timeline again. Lindsay from, is it San Diego?
San Diego, yeah, Lindsay, let's cover this one directly. I'll give you a call, and I'm glad you can join today. Thank you. I would emphasize what I said at the beginning of the Q&A here around flexibility. I'd be interested in understanding a bit more about the plans you have moving forward. But to build on a lot of the themes that we've been discussing in response to these questions here, in addition to flexibility, we're also thinking a lot about transparency and specificity. So how can we capture what, in your case, local government cities are doing that would be useful for others to understand and provide some specificity around actions, upgrades, et cetera. And I'd love to find a way to do that together and make the timing work if we can.
But Nate, if I can, I'll just riff on that. I mean, the goal is for this pilot to be a year or two. So if you're not starting on stuff for 2 years, that may not be the perfect fit for this pilot. It doesn't mean we don't want to work with you, but in this pilot, we're really asking partners to jump in, pick 1 or 2 buildings with the goal of, in 2 years, being able to report out on progress down that pathway and what it took and where they got stuck, and so that we're actually working right now on issues that are in buildings. And that's why we're fine if people have already started, right? That was the question, the baseline. Is there work you've done a couple of years ago that can be counted? The answer is yes, as long as we can document that and understand that, that would certainly be part of the pathway. Okay, I'm very mindful that it's 1:58 and we do have one more slide we want to show, but let me just ask my team, is there any other question on here that we're going to have to, that people can be very succinct in answering in just a minute? We're not really looking at scope 3 emissions for this. So again, it's primarily scope 1 and scope 2. If you're doing scope 3, that's great. We don't want to dissuade you from doing that, but this is primarily on scope 1 and 2. Any other, Joe or Paul or Nate, any other questions we can answer really quickly? Some of these look like they're slightly longer answers.
Well, I just have to acknowledge the question about how do you define additionality, which is not a question I can answer in 30 seconds, but it's one we're very interested in exploring as part of this pilot in terms of what do we mean by, why exactly are operational emissions reductions better than buying RECs and offsets in the minds of many experts, and what does increased additionality mean at the building level? So don't have an answer for you, but it's one of the key themes that we want to explore and work with you on.
And that's really a nice pivot to the last slide, which is we are looking forward to working with and exploring all these topics and issues and challenges that you have as part of this pilot. We want to thank everybody for joining the webinar today. there is my email, and there is the Better Building Solutions Center. There is more information, and as well as the fact sheet that we talked a little bit about, available on the Solutions Center for those of you who are interested in more or sharing paper within their organization about what it is we're trying to do. We really hope that many of you want to join with us in the pilot. There's a lot we're looking forward to learning from each other and working together on, again, as a very powerful way to harness the savings and the opportunities that exist by moving buildings, plants, and multifamily housing forward towards a low carbon future for the United States. And so we're looking forward to working with any and all of you that want to join with us in really understanding what that means in the real world and sharing those ideas, solutions, and pathways forward. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining. Paul, Nate, Joe, thank you guys for all your help. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to working with you, many of you, in the future. So thanks again. Bye-bye.